Sunday, June 21st, is almost upon us. The last Sunday before the feast of the birth of St. John the Baptist, a date your mother and your grandmother always kept marked on the calendar. And on that day, in your home, you'll be doing things they did, things you repeat without ever asking why. I need to tell you something before that day arrives. There are between 5 and 7 inherited customs that a devout Catholic should never practice on this particular Sunday. No one explained it to you this way, but Saint Teresa of Jesus did. She left them written down, one by one, with the true reason why each one offends the forerunner on his eve. And before June 21st arrives, you're going to know exactly which ones they are by name, which they are, and what you should put in their place. Because the Saint of Avila added to each prohibition a specific gesture that takes its place, so that the feast of the forerunner enters the Catholic home clean. And here comes the deepest question of all, the one many Catholic women have carried in their chest since they were girls without ever telling a soul. What if everything my mother did each eve of St. John, with the most sincere devotion, came from something far older than the Church? Tell me right now in the comments which was the first custom of St. John's days that your mother or grandmother taught you, the one that just came to mind without thinking. I'll be reading. And while you tell me, we'll open up what the discalced Carmel kept hidden behind its enclosure walls for centuries. What you're going to hear today either makes sense as a whole, or it gets lost beyond recovery. The forerunner holds a unique place within the Catholic calendar. The Church celebrates the birth of only 3 persons throughout the liturgical year: Christ at Christmas, the Virgin Mary on September the 8th, and St. John the Baptist on June 24th. 3, that's all. Every other saint has his or her feast on the day they died, because that was their birth into heaven. The Church celebrates the Baptist also on the day he came into this world, because while he was still in the womb of his mother Elizabeth, he leapt with joy upon recognizing Christ, newly conceived in the womb of Mary. Saint Luke tells the story in detail in the first chapter of his Gospel, in the scene known from ancient times as the Visitation, when the Virgin, already carrying the Word, climbs into the mountains of Judea to be with her cousin Elizabeth during the final months of her pregnancy. There, in that house, the first recognition of the Messiah by another human being still unborn takes place. And because of that leap, that prenatal recognition of the Messiah, the Church decided from the earliest centuries that the birth of the forerunner deserved a solemnity of its own. June 24th comes from a precise calculation. It's worked out from verse 26 of that same first chapter of St. Luke, where the angel Gabriel announces to Mary that her cousin Elizabeth is already in her 6th month. If the Annunciation of the Lord falls on March 25th, 6 months later you arrive at June 24th. And since the Nativity of our Lord is set on December 25th, 6 months after the Baptists, the Catholic liturgical calendar has an internal precision few people know about. Now then, that June 24th falls only 2 or 3 days after the summer solstice in the Northern Hemisphere. And the solstice was, many centuries before Christianity, one of the oldest and most deeply rooted feasts in the whole Mediterranean basin, throughout Europe, throughout North Africa. The Romans celebrated it, the Celts did too. So did the Iberian peoples before Roman times. All of them met at one point, lighting fires on the shortest night of the year. When the Christian faith took root in these lands, during the first centuries of the Church, the shepherds of souls did careful work. They purified what could be purified. They forbade what could not be reconciled with the revealed faith. And they let people keep what could be translated into the gospel without betraying its meaning. The bonfire of the eve of the Baptist came to evoke the fire of the Holy Spirit and to recall the forerunner who came to prepare the ways of the Lord. The medicinal herbs gathered around the solstice came to be seen as gifts of creation arranged by the Creator to heal sick bodies. The waters of rivers at dawn on the 24th came to evoke the Jordan, where the Baptist himself poured water over Christ's head at the most important moment of his entire mission. That was the Church's intention, and for many centuries the substitution worked. But popular Catholicism is a living current that gets contaminated as time passes when catechesis fails. From the late Middle Ages onward, in many regions of Castile, of Andalusia, of Galicia, and later throughout Spanish America, after the evangelization of the New World, the customs of the solstice began to recover, drop by drop, their original pagan meaning. The bonfire stopped evoking the fire of the Holy Spirit and started being seen again as an instrument of magical purification. The herbs stopped being gifts of the Creator and went back to being ingredients in potions and amulets. The dew water stopped recalling the Jordan and became a substance with its own power to cure illnesses, draw the beloved, drive off the evil eye, read what was coming. The wax of candles was poured into bowls of water at midnight, so the shapes would foretell whether the marriage would be a happy one. Mirrors were set facing one another with a candle between them to see the face of the betrothed. And in many Castilian villages this was done without any awareness that the faith was being left behind, because the gesture came from grandmother and great-grandmother, and no one remembered its origin anymore. Saint Teresa of Jesus was born in 1515 in Avila, at the very heart of Old Castile. She saw all of this from childhood. She saw it in her own house, where her mother Beatriz de Ahumada cared for 3 daughters and 9 sons. She saw it in the family properties of Gotarrendura, where she spent long stretches of time, and on the visits she made with her parents to her uncle Pedro de Cepeda in Ortigosa. And she saw it above all once she was a grown woman and a Carmelite, as she traveled through Castile, founding the convents of the Descalced Carmel. 15 foundations in as many years spread across very different cities, each one with its own popular way of living the eve of the Baptist, with a fervor that mixed authentic devotion to the forerunner with practices that Saint Teresa of Jesus would identify one by one and write down in the directives she handed to the prioresses before leaving. These directives are documented, some in letters preserved in the archive of the Descalced Carmel, others in specific passages of her major works. And all of them agree on one thing very plainly. There are practices on the eve of St. John the Baptist that a Christian soul should never touch, not even out of family custom, not even to keep mother or grandmother company in what they always did, not even with the excuse that everyone in the village does it. Which practices these are, one by one, with their Spanish name and with the reason Saint Teresa of Avila left written down for each one, you're going to know right now, starting with the root from which all the others spring. That letter to her sister Juana de Ahumada, written from Toledo in the summer of 1577, gathered up something Saint Teresa of Jesus had been mulling over for decades. Juana, married to Juan de Ovalle, lived in Alba de Tormes, in a house open to the town, with servants, small nephews, and neighbors coming in and out all day long. Into that house came everything that came into any Castilian house of those days: the customs of the valley and the recipes of the old women that mothers taught their daughters for the great days of the year. Saint Teresa of Jesus knew perfectly well what they were, and she wrote to Juana to put her on guard before the eve of the Baptist arrived, because in her mind as a foundress, it was already clear what she would say to the prioresses of her convents when she returned from Toledo. She said it afterwards, in various directives, and she left it written down in very specific passages of the Way of Perfection and the Interior Castle that bears slow reading. To her brother Lorenzo de Cepeda, just returned from the Indies, she also wrote that same summer with a similar worry, asking him to keep watch over the customs of his own house and of his American servants, because in those new lands the pagan mixtures were sinking even deeper roots than in Castile. In those texts, The Saint of Avila distinguished with uncommon clarity three kinds of women when it came to the eve of the forerunner. The first was the simply devout woman who went to Mass on the eve and on the feast day itself, who prayed the rosary with her family and lived those days without mixing her devotion with anything else. Saint Teresa of Avila said the Baptist looks at that woman with the eyes of an older brother. The second was the woman who, without any malice, out of inherited family custom, mixed Christian gestures with forgotten pagan ones. With her, the Saint of Avila dealt patiently, and she asked her to examine her customs one by one with a priest. The third was the woman who had fallen completely into superstitions, dressed up as devotion to the Baptist. Her Saint Teresa of Jesus warned harshly because she knew the soul was in real danger. That second category is what matters today. It's where most of the devout Catholic women hearing this voice right now find themselves. Good women, faithful to Sunday Mass, faithful to regular confession, yet women who have inherited from mother or grandmother certain gestures for St. John's days, gestures they repeat year after year without ever having examined them with a priest. The Saint of Avila was very clear in her texts. She loved these women tenderly and considered them her own spiritual daughters, far from any condemnation. What she urgently asked of them was that they separate the wheat from the chaff before the next eve of the Baptist arrived. Without that prior sifting, the Saint of Avila said in passages of the Way of Perfection, on what she called the novelties, authentic devotion gets contaminated beyond repair and ends up losing its intercessory power. And the soul is left with the appearance of fervor on the outside and confusion on the inside, no longer knowing which saint she's praying to or what grace she's asking for. In her convents of the Discalced Carmel, once they were founded, she left very concrete instructions for the days leading up to June 24th. The 22nd and 23rd, 2 days of silent prayer for the souls in purgatory and for the sanctification of the whole feast. The eve, on the night of the 23rd, attendance at the liturgical vigil, if there was one in the nearby parish church, or in its place, prolonged prayer before the tabernacle in the convent's oratory. The morning of the 24th, solemn Mass with communion, white liturgical vestments if the rubrics allowed, reading of the first chapter of St. Luke in the refectory during the meal. And throughout the 3 days, an absolute ban on speaking of popular customs of the eve among the sisters, with no exceptions allowed. In the convent of San Jose in Avila, the first one the Saint of Avila founded in 1562, that ban was included in the directives for the sisters. In the convent of Toledo, founded 7 years later, she repeated the same instruction by word of mouth before leaving for the next foundation. That last prohibition is worth holding on to. Saint Teresa of Jesus knew that if one of the sisters, newly entered into Carmel, brought along in her memory the customs of her village and began telling them during recreation time, other younger sisters would end up contaminating their devotion to the Baptist with that material. So, absolute silence about solstice folklore during the 3 great days, an open conversation only about the gospel of the forerunner, his preaching at the Jordan, his martyrdom at the hands of Herod Antipas. Now, what held for her nuns, Saint Teresa of Avila extended with prudence to the laity through letters and through the conversations she had with the families that visited her in the parlors. And there, in that teaching given to the laity, is the concrete list of things a devout Catholic should never do on the Sunday of June 21st that's drawing near. A list the Saint of Avila put together one directive at a time, one conversation at a time, until she set it down in writing during her last season before dying in Alba de Tormes in 1582. The first item on that list, the one at the root of everything else, is so simple and so central that many devout women break it without knowing what they're doing. When they hear it said aloud, some will think it can't be that important because they've been doing it their whole lives. That's exactly why it deserves a full hearing, because Saint Teresa of Jesus took the trouble of writing it down first of all. Let's begin with the first one, which is the mother of all the rest. What Saint Teresa of Jesus placed at the head of her list was this: Sunday, June 21st, before being the eve of anything, is the day of the Lord. It's the day the Church consecrates to the Eucharist, to the assembly of the faithful, to rest for the body and joy for the soul. And everything done on that day has to pass first through Sunday Mass. Without that priority in place, the day begins crooked and the soul feels it for weeks. Here is the first real mistake, the one many devout women make year after year without realizing it. They get up that Sunday with their head already set on what they'll do later, on the herbs that should be gathered before the sun beats down too hard, on the water left out in the open the night of the 23rd, on what's being cooked for the eve and what will be told to the daughters. And with their head set there, the whole Sunday slips by underneath the Mass. They go to Mass, of course. Almost all of them go. But they arrive with their minds somewhere else. They receive communion without having recollected themselves. They walk out of the church without having given thanks. And the feast of the forerunner enters their home with the soul still scattered, occupied by 20 small preparations that stole away the stillness before the offertory. Saint Teresa of Avila explained this in detail in chapter 22 of The Way of Perfection, when she speaks of mental prayer and how the soul gets distracted by outward things on the great days. The Saint of Avila said the human soul is like a vessel that fills up with whatever it puts its attention on, and that if it puts its attention on material preparations for a coming feast, it arrives at Mass with the vessel already full, and there's no room for the grace the sacrament offers. That is her literal image in the Way, set down in passages worth reading slowly. Hold on to something the Saint of Avila pointed out elsewhere in the Way that throws light on everything above. The soul who comes to Mass with her head on other matters doesn't walk out of the church empty, because the objective grace of the sacrament is given just the same to anyone who receives communion in a state of grace. But the subjective grace, the kind that enters the communicant's soul because there's inner room for it, comes in much diminished, and the soul walks out into the street without having picked up what the Lord had come to give in that specific Mass. She loses, without knowing it, the inner strength that would have served her through the rest of the week, and she's left with the feeling that something important slipped through her fingers. Then there's that harsh scene in the book of her Foundations, where the Saint of Avila describes what happened in a small community of Castilian holy women who were preparing themselves so eagerly for the eve of St. John the Baptist that they ended up neglecting Mass on the previous Sunday. 3 of them fell sick within days. 1 of them died without being able to receive the last sacraments because of the confusion of those days. Saint Teresa of Jesus, who learned of the case from the parish priest who attended the dying woman, left written that this painful death had been permitted as a warning for the other women of the region. A painful warning, yes, but a warning, so they would understand that the eve of a saint, no matter how great that saint may be, cannot be prepared by trampling on the day of the Lord. That warning still holds today. The herb you might gather this afternoon after Mass will be every bit as good as the one you'd gather this morning while skipping Mass. The water left out is gathered on the night of the 23rd, not on the morning of the 21st. The conversations with your daughters about family customs all fit into the afternoon and evening of Sunday, after you've given the Lord what belongs to the Lord. The urgency you feel to organize the eve of St. John on Sunday morning comes from an inherited nervousness, from a hurry your grandmother also had without really knowing why. Saint Teresa of Avila would ask one single thing of that woman, that she sit down first at Mass with a quiet heart, and that afterwards, in due time, she arrange everything else of the day. And there's a liturgical detail worth holding on to. This year, June 21st falls on the 12th Sunday of Ordinary Time. The liturgy of that Sunday has its own gospel, its own psalm, its own epistle, laid out by the universal church for your soul that morning. That word of God, spoken from the ambo of your parish, is food the Lord has prepared for you ahead of any earthly preparation. If your mind stays on the herbs and the water of the eve, you'll miss the portion of spiritual nourishment God had set aside for you. And the feast of the forerunner will arrive at your house without the inner strength that Sunday would have given you. This is the first prohibition. Skipping or mentally relegating the Mass of Sunday, June 21st, in order to organize the eve of the 23rd is, according to Saint Teresa of Jesus, the neglect from which every other mistake hangs. If you correct this one, the rest comes into order almost on its own. If you neglect it, everything else stands in danger. That's why the Saint of Avila left it written down before any other. Because Sunday belongs to the Lord before it belongs to the forerunner. And because the forerunner himself, who said that famous line, "He must increase and I must decrease," would be offended if his feast were prepared by robbing Christ of pride of place on his own day. Here is the true order, and on this order depend the prohibitions that follow. Now to fire, which sits at the very center of everything that comes next. The bonfire on the night of St. John is probably the most recognizable element of the entire eve. The one that shows up in the photographs of the villages, the one the children sing about as they leap over the flames in the plazas, the one your own father may have jumped over as a young man back in his hometown. And it's also, according to Saint Teresa of Jesus, the rite where the pagan spirit slips in most easily when catechesis fails. Here is the second concrete prohibition. Leaping over the bonfire with any superstitious intention, whether to purify yourself, attract good fortune, or drive away evil, is a practice a devout Catholic should not engage in on June 23rd, period. And you don't need 5 jumps, or 7, or an intention spoken aloud. It's enough to leap over the bonfire with the idea, even a half-formed one, that the fire is going to do something for you that your soul needs. The moment your heart sets that expectation on the flame, the rite moves into the territory the Saint of Avila warned about with such firmness in her directives to the prioresses. Why exactly? Because the eve of the Baptist, even though it falls near the summer solstice, is the eve of a Christian saint, and a Christian saint doesn't purify anything with material fire in a wood bonfire out in the open. The fire of the Catholic rite is liturgical. The altar candle, the paschal candle, the lamps of the exposed Blessed Sacrament, the incense from the censer during solemnities. Those fires do have a concrete spiritual function because they are sacramentals blessed by the Church, and their meaning is written in the liturgical books. The village bonfire lacks that condition. It's fire and nothing more, burning wood, warmth on a summer night. Now, Saint Teresa of Avila did not condemn the bonfire wholesale, far from it. She drew careful distinctions, gathering the neighborhood, the family, around a moderate fire on the night of the 23rd to celebrate the forerunner with joy, with religious singing, with the eventual presence of the village priest, and the ordinary blessing of fire that the Church contemplated in some ancient rituals that she viewed with favor. It was honest fellowship. It was a Christian feast, a community gathered around a saint. What she rejected was the leap over the flames, done with magical expectation. The high point of her teaching on fire is found in chapter 29 of the book of her life, much more than in her directives about the eve. There, the Saint of Avila tells about that mystical experience the tradition knows as the transverbration. She saw a small angel, all aflame with a fire that did not burn wood or bodies, but scorched the soul. The angel carried a long golden dart with a tip of burning iron, and he plunged it several times into the Saint of Avila's heart, leaving her with a pain that was pure spiritual sweetness. That experience, lived around 1562, left Saint Teresa of Jesus with a very precise knowledge of what the true fire of the soul is, a fire from heaven, kindled neither with wood nor leapt over in a plaza, nor handled with human gestures inherited from a forgotten solstice. That wound to her heart was documented in detail by the Saint of Avila in that same chapter 29, and she also described it years later in passages of the sixth mansions of the interior castle, with the same image of a fire that penetrates without consuming wood or burning garments, yet scorches the most intimate part of the soul. For Saint Teresa of Avila, after that night, all material fire claimed to be spiritual fell far short of the real thing. An earthly fire of wood cannot do to the soul what heaven does in a single instant of true mystical grace. That's why she warned her daughters afterwards with such urgency about the bonfires of the eve of the forerunner. After that transverberation, the Saint of Avila looked at the bonfires of the Castilian countryside with different eyes. She saw them as small. She saw them as poor in comparison with the fire she had felt in her heart. And she understood with a new clarity why the soul that seeks authentic purification will never find it by leaping over flames in a plaza, no matter how often the whole family has leapt over them. That purification belongs to the sacrament, to specific sacramental confession, to the Eucharistic sacrifice, to the prolonged mental prayer the Saint of Avila practiced 2 hours each day. The bonfire by itself doesn't touch the soul. And if the soul asks the bonfire to touch her with superstitious expectation, what enters the heart at that moment is something very different from what the leaper had hoped to receive. Here is the concrete substitution Saint Teresa of Avila proposed for the Catholic home. On the night of the 23rd, instead of going out to leap over bonfires or organizing a fire in the garden with superstitious intent, light a candle at the household altar you already have at home, beside an image of Christ, of the Virgin Mary, or of the forerunner himself if you have one. Pray the rosary with the family. Ask the Baptist to prepare the ways of the Lord in your home as he himself prepared them along the banks of the Jordan. Let that small flame on the household altar be the only bonfire in your house that night, and you'll see the feast of the 24th enter your home with a cleanness no wood fire could have given you. That's the second prohibition. The bonfire leapt with intent. When you hear it said that way, remember your mother leapt over it because her mother taught her to. And now it's your turn to decide whether your daughters will leap over it too, or whether they'll learn from you the gesture the forerunner expects from houses that bear his name. After fire, the matter most loaded with custom on the eve of the Baptist is water. And the third concrete prohibition from Saint Teresa of Jesus falls right on it, with the same firmness as the one on the bonfire. In many regions of Spain and throughout Spanish America, the Eve of St. John brings with it a ritual widely practiced and deeply loved by women. Going out at dawn on the 24th, before the sun rises, to gather the dew from the field herbs, or water from a nearby river, or water from a village fountain, to use it later to wash one's face, bathe the children, sprinkle the threshold of the house, water the plants of the garden. This water is called, depending on the region, St. John's water, or the Baptist's dew, or in some villages of the northern peninsula, water of the seven fountains. And properties are attributed to it that are worth examining slowly. Popular belief says the water gathered at the exact moment of dawn on June 24th has the power to heal skin diseases, return youth to a woman's face, draw the beloved if a single woman bathes with it, drive off the evil eye in newborn children. There are variations by region. In some places, a sprig of mint is added to the container. In others, coins are placed at the bottom, or the basin is left out overnight on the 23rd, and the face is wetted with it at first light on the 24th. Here comes the third prohibition from the Saint of Avila. Using that water, gathered under any of those customs, with the intention popular tradition attaches to it, means stepping into a superstition the Catholic faith can never accept. Because the dew water in itself has no spiritual power whatsoever. Water blessed by a priest does have power, because the Church, in her blessing rite, asked the Lord to sanctify it for the protection of the faithful who use it. That is holy water. And only that, within the Catholic order, does any of what popular belief attributes to the dew of the 24th. Saint Teresa of Avila explained this with an image drawn from her own spiritual experience. She was deeply devoted to holy water. In the book of her life, she tells, in passages that have become famous, how she always kept a small container of holy water with her, and how in moments of spiritual disturbance, when she sensed the presence of the devil prowling around her cell, she would sprinkle holy water in the sign of the cross around the room, and the devil would leave at once. That was the water she valued, none other. The water consecrated by the hand of the priest at the baptismal font was for Saint Teresa of Jesus the only water with real spiritual power. Different from all the common waters the people gather at dawn on the 24th with inherited magical intention. And here is the exact difference between a devout custom and a superstitious one. Catholic devotion rests on sacramentals blessed by the Church. The sacramental is holy water, blessed salt, a medal placed by a priest, the Carmelite scapula, a rosary blessed by a confessor. Things the Church, through the public prayer of her ordained ministers, has placed at the service of the soul of the faithful. Superstition rests on common objects, field water, herbs gathered under a full moon, river stones, on which popular imagination has hung a power those objects don't have and can't have in themselves. The Saint of Avila repeated this distinction at every visit of lay people who came to the parlor of the Discalced Carmel, asking about inherited customs they could no longer tell were authentic devotion or remnants of old paganism. The substitution is very concrete and within your reach this very week. Before the 23rd arrives at nightfall, go to your parish and fill a container with holy water. They'll give you all you ask for, free of charge, because it's the right of the faithful. And that holy water is what you'll have at home for everything popular tradition wants to attribute to the dew of St. John. Bless the threshold of your house with it on the night of the 23rd. Sprinkle the rooms of your children before they go to sleep that night. Wet your forehead with it when you wake on the 24th, before heading out to solemn Mass. Carry it in a small flask in your purse throughout the octave of the Baptist, which runs from the 24th to the 1st of July according to the traditional calendar. If you have sick or elderly relatives who can no longer leave their homes, bring them a flask too, so they themselves can make the sign of the cross with holy water on the night of the 23rd. And you'll see that the real spiritual effect, the one your soul needs, comes from the true sacramental, never from the popular rite contaminated by forgotten paganism. Saint Teresa of Jesus insisted strongly with her sisters that holy water should replace the dew in the homes of the novices she had drawn out of the world to bring into Carmel. In the letters she sent to relatives outside the convent, she repeated the same indication over and over with the same insistent tone. Buy a large flask on your next visit to the church and always keep it full, renewed every so often. And forget the dawn dew of the 24th, because it's common water that custom has swollen with a meaning the simple water cannot sustain. That's the third prohibition, the dew water gathered with inherited superstitious intent. Together with the Mass, relegated by the preparations, and the bonfire, leapt with magical expectation. It completes the first set of things the Saint of Avila asked devout Catholics to leave behind before the eve of the forerunner draws near. Now we come to a matter even more widespread than the previous ones, the herbs of the eve of the forerunner. Across the entire Catholic geography, from Galicia to the Argentine Pampas, from the Mexican Levant to northern Colombia, on the night of June 23rd, bunches of plants are gathered with the inherited idea that at that exact moment the field gives the very best of itself, and that those herbs, dried and preserved, serve the entire year as protection, healing, and amulet for the home. The specific plants are always the same, though they go by different names in each country. St. John's wort, called in many villages quite literally St. John's herb because of its yellow flowering precisely during those days. Rosemary, sometimes called by other names depending on the region. Verbena, which some families place under their pillow that night. Rue, a plant of very strong scent used popularly against the evil eye. Spanish lavender, the wild lavender of Castile. Wild chamomile, fennel, male fern, yarrow, milfoil, mallow, common sage. A list every grandmother in the village knows by heart, and every granddaughter inherits without ever examining. Here is the fourth prohibition Saint Teresa of Jesus set down in writing in her directives to the sisters and to the laity who visited her. Gathering those herbs at midnight on the 23rd with the magical intention of protection attributed to the date means stepping once again into a superstition the Catholic faith does not tolerate. And once again, as with the water, it's worth marking very clearly where the line lies. The difference is this: gathering rosemary on the afternoon of the 23rd to cook a stew, picking St. John's wort to prepare a tea that settles the stomach, cutting verbena to scent the house. All that is normal household use, with no spiritual connotation whatsoever, and the Saint of Avila gives it her blessing without reservation. What enters forbidden territory is the other idea, the inherited notion that those same herbs, gathered precisely on that day and at that specific hour, acquire a protective or healing power they wouldn't have if gathered on any other day of the calendar. That idea is pure solstice paganism dressed up as devotion to the Baptist, without the woman practicing it even realizing what she's putting on. Saint Teresa of Avila treated this at length in passages of the Sixth Mansions, where she speaks of spiritual confidence displaced toward outward objects. The Saint of Avila writes there about how the soul gradually starts leaning without realizing it on things that seem small, a holy card, an object, a bundle, and starts transferring to those things the inner strength that only God should be sustaining. And she warned with great firmness that in this displacement, however small it might seem, a door opens to spiritual confusion that takes a long time to close afterwards. Applying that teaching to the bundle of rue hung at the door of the house on the night of the 23rd is exactly what the saint would ask us to do today. In the letters she wrote to relatives and friends during her final years as foundress, the Saint of Avila insisted strongly on this point. She asked that they examine with a prudent priest the herbs each household had in kitchen and pantry, and that they remove any bundle tied with ribbons marked with the date of St. John, or deliberately preserved since the 23rd of the previous year. Those objects, however innocent they might appear, were the usual sign of the inherited solstice magical rite, and even if the owner of the house had no explicit superstitious intent, the household sacramental was weakened by the silent presence of bundles loaded with ancient custom. Why is a bundle of herbs so serious? Because the first commandment of the Decalogue is very clear. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and you shall have no other gods before his face. When a Catholic woman hangs rue at the door of her house on the night of the 23rd with the intent of protecting herself from evil, she is placing her trust for protection, even in small measure, on that rue. Even if she still prays the rosary, goes to Mass every Sunday, and calls herself a devout Catholic, there's a tiny part of her heart that has been deposited on a dried plant. And the first commandment suffers from that displacement, however small it might appear at first glance. The concrete substitution is very simple, and once again it consists of swapping an unsuitable object for a blessed sacramental. If you want to protect your home on the night of the 23rd, hang on the main door a blessed crucifix, or an image of the Holy Family, or a holy card of the Forerunner blessed by your parish priest the next time you stop by the sacristy. To protect your children in their room, you can place under their pillow the Saint Benedict medal, known from ancient times for its intercessory strength against spiritual evil. And if you happen to want fresh herbs in the house that week, gather as many as you like during the afternoon of the 23rd, with no magical intention behind it. Put them in a vase in the living room as decoration, or cook them in the family supper. Saint Teresa of Jesus asked the novices of the Discalced Carmel that before the 23rd, they go through each cell and discreetly remove any bundle of herbs that some sister, just brought in from the world, might have carried with her out of deep-rooted family custom. And in its place, the Saint of Avila would set a small crucifix or a blessed Carmelite holy card at the head of the bed. That was the silent but firm operation by which each year, in her 15 foundations scattered across Castile, she cleansed the spiritual air of the convent before the eve of the Baptist. That's the fourth prohibition. Herbs gathered at midnight with magical intention. Gathering them out of culinary custom, by all means. With superstitious, protective intent, absolutely not. The whole difference lies in the head of the one gathering, in the prayer she speaks or keeps silent while doing it, and in what she decides to hang afterwards on the door of her house. The fifth prohibition leads the soul into still subtler ground, the divinations of the eve. In most Catholic villages, the night of June 23rd is a classic occasion for practices that seek, through concrete gestures, information about the future. Who will be the husband of the unmarried daughter? How many children she'll have? Whether the husband's business will prosper in the coming year? Whether the grandfather's illness will be cured at last? Whether there will be enough rain during the summer? Legitimate questions, human questions, taken down paths the Catholic faith does not accept. The practices are many and almost all share the same inner structure. A simple object is prepared. It's left out in the open during the night of the 23rd, and at dawn on the 24th, its shape or behavior is read as the answer to the question raised before sleep. The egg in a glass of water is the most widespread one. The shell is broken that night, the contents poured into clear water, left there all through the early morning, and at first light the shapes the strands of white and yolk have taken on are read as a map of the coming year. The wax melted in water is interpreted the same way, as are ivy leaves placed face down under the water or knotted cords with a specific question left on top of the pillow until dawn. Here is the fifth prohibition. Any practice of divination in any material form done on the eve of the Baptist or any other night is absolutely forbidden by the Catholic faith. And the Saint of Avila said so in very harsh words in her directives to the laity who visited her. It's worth explaining exactly why. The Church, following the teaching of the Old Testament gathered in chapter 18 of the book of Deuteronomy, strictly forbids the faithful any consultation of fortune, of the future, or of hidden things outside the ordinary means God has provided. Personal and liturgical prayer, the sacraments, the magisterium of the Church, and in extraordinary cases, the prophetic word spoken by an authentic prophet, recognized by the ecclesial community. Any other attempt to know the future through ritual gestures enters into what the Catechism calls divination, and it is a grave sin against the first commandment. The distinction matters because it marks the real boundary of the spiritual freedom of the faithful. The Catholic faith welcomes with respect the great human mysteries, the legitimate questions about what's to come, the natural doubts about the years ahead. And for those mysteries, the Church has provided her own healthy paths: prolonged prayer before the tabernacle, spiritual direction with a prudent priest, meditative reading of sacred scripture, consultation with an experienced confessor of Carmel or of another order of sound doctrine. Any other path, however attractive or however harmless it appears dressed up as a game, leaves the soul exposed to forces that spiritual theology has identified by very concrete names throughout the centuries. Saint Teresa of Avila addressed it in very specific passages of the Way of Perfection and of the first mansions of the interior castle, where she refers to what she called the novelties. For the Saint of Avila, a novelty was any attempt to reach hidden information through outward gestures meant to bypass the ordinary means established by the Church. And she warned that these novelties, however innocent they seem, however much they're done as a game between cousins in the kitchen and the whole family laughs at the result the next day, leave a spiritual mark on the soul that's very hard to erase afterwards. Because the soul, by the mere fact of having exposed itself to the divinatory rite, is left open to something the rite invoked, whether the one invoking was aware of it or not. Here is the real danger for the soul of the devout woman. The one who on the night of the 23rd breaks an egg into water in her kitchen, laughing with her eldest daughter about what the shapes will tell come morning, is doing more than playing an innocent game. She is, without knowing it, opening a spiritual door the human soul should never open under any pretext. And through that door, according to the spiritual teaching of the Church, very different influences can come in from those the person expected. Inner confusion and a spiritual fog that afterwards lasts for weeks or even months, and the confessor has to help clear it away with patience. Saint Teresa of Jesus knew specific cases in Avila of devout women who, having broken the St. John egg as a game with their daughters, came afterwards to her parlor with night after night of bad dreams, with feelings of a strange presence in the room, with an inner confusion that lasted for months with no explainable reason. The Saint of Avila gathered them with absolute discretion and used them afterwards in her directives to the laity as examples of how a small and seemingly playful gesture can open up long spiritual consequences the soul suffers without understanding where they come from. The substitution here is very different from the previous ones. There's no concrete sacramental that replaces the object. What replaces the divinatory rite is the trusting silence of the soul before the mystery of what's to come. The devout Catholic woman, facing the question of what the year will bring, facing the worry about the future of her husband or of her daughter, facing the grandfather's illness, does one concrete thing. She kneels, opens the Gospel of the Baptist in the first chapter of St. Luke, reads those verses where the forerunner says, "He must increase and I must decrease," and silently leaves her question at the feet of Christ through the forerunner. That is the valid prayer, the only one the Catholic faith authorizes before the closed mystery of what's to come. That's the fifth prohibition: divinations of any kind on that night. And with this, the list has come a long way, though two prohibitions still remain to be set down before we close. Two final prohibitions remain, and these are the ones the Saint of Avila used to cite at the end of her directives, so their seriousness would stay etched in the laity's memory. The sixth is the most surprising for many devout women because outwardly it looks like authentic devotion. I'm talking about the esoteric letters or petitions addressed to the forerunner with specific formulas inherited hand to hand. In many families, the custom is to write a letter to the Baptist on the night of the 23rd, on clean paper, folded in a specific way, sealed with 3 white candles and signed in different colors, asking for very concrete things: health for someone sick, a husband for a daughter, money for an old debt, peace in a broken family. The letter is burned at dawn on the 24th or buried in the garden at the foot of a tree carefully chosen. Here is the sixth prohibition: any letter or petition to the forerunner that requires a specific formula, candles and signatures in an exact number, paper color, way of folding, precise hour of writing, or any similar material protocol, stands outside authentic Catholic prayer and enters the territory of inherited ritual magic. Period. Why so serious? Because Catholic prayer to a saint in heaven requires no material protocol whatsoever. Asking the Baptist for intercession is done on one's knees before his image. with words from the heart or with prayers approved by the church, with no counting of candles or colors or signatures, with no precise hours. The saint in heaven does not attend to a daughter of God because the signature is in red rather than blue, or because there are 3 candles rather than 1. The effectiveness of Catholic prayer rests on the faith of the one asking, on her state of grace, on her humility before God, and on her trust in the intercession of the saint invoked. Never on the material formula surrounding the petition. When a devout woman falls into these letters with material protocol, she's treating the forerunner as if he were a genie in a magic lamp, a spirit she can manipulate through the right gesture. And that is paganism at bottom, even though outwardly it looks like devotion to the Baptist. Saint Teresa of Jesus said it with this firmness in her directives: the saint in heaven is offended when he is treated like a spirit of nature, and prayer loses all its effectiveness precisely when one tries to mechanize it through an inherited protocol. The 7th and last concrete prohibition is the ritual bath of purification at dawn on the 24th. In many regions, especially in the southern peninsula and in several parts of Spanish America, the night of the 23rd ends with a bath in the river or in the sea at first light, done with the inherited idea of purification that the Baptist water would give to whoever submerges in it. Whole families go down to the river at dawn, submerge 3 times in a row in the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, cross themselves with the water, and then go back up to the village believing the soul has been cleansed for the rest of the liturgical year. That practice, done with that specific intention of spiritual cleansing, is also forbidden by the Catholic faith, and for the same theological reason as the previous ones. Christian baptism, received once in a lifetime from the priest at the baptismal font, is sufficient for one's entire existence, and its deep renewal happens only in valid sacramental confession with an ordained priest. No bath in river or sea can replace the sacrament of penance, no matter how much fervor the bather puts into the gesture. And to claim spiritual purification through a natural immersion is to return to the pagan rite the Church had already transformed centuries earlier into the single Christian baptism. Here is the true closing of the whole list. What Saint Teresa of Avila proposed to a devout woman like her own mother, Beatriz de Ahumada, as a positive pass through the eve of the Baptist is very simple and fits into 4 concrete steps. First, sacramental confession on Monday the 22nd or Tuesday the 23rd at the parish, so as to arrive at the 24th with the soul clean and ready. Second, quiet reading of the entire first chapter of St. Luke during the afternoon of the 23rd, aloud if there's family gathered in the living room, in silence if the listener is alone in her room. Third, attendance at the evening Mass on the 23rd if the parish celebrates it, and in its place, praying the full rosary before the image of the Baptist. Fourth, attendance at the solemn Mass on the morning of the 24th, with communion received in a state of grace. Those 4 steps are the entire path Saint Teresa of Jesus set down in writing for her daughters of the Discalced Carmel, and for the devout lay women who surrounded her in the parlors of her convents. They are perfectly practicable today, in any city, in any country, with no need to add any inherited solstice folklore. The whole feast of the Baptist fits inside them with no loss of fervor or spiritual depth, keeping the legitimate joy a great day of the Catholic calendar deserves to have in the home of a believing family. The rest, everything else your mother taught you and that you repeat each year out of family custom, is worth examining with your trusted confessor before the next eve of St. John. Some of those inherited customs may stay in your home, the ones compatible with the faith. Others will have to be quietly withdrawn with no family scandal whatsoever. That personal sifting is your work throughout the coming year, that's all. That's what the Saint of Avila did on the eve of the forerunner her whole adult life, what she taught her daughters of Carmel in her 15 foundations. And what any devout Catholic can do this year, in place of the customs the list has just gone through. Getting this far is an act of devotion the forerunner can see from heaven. What you've just received fits into a single sentence. An authentic Catholic Eve lived the way Saint Teresa of Jesus lived it across her 15 foundations scattered through Castile, without a single inherited gesture of solstice paganism mixed in with the fervor of the Baptist. This is what your mother would have wanted to know if someone had taken the patience and the love to explain it to her this way. This is what your daughters need to see in you, in the quiet way you'll live your own June 24th this year. Look at your home now with new eyes. The feast of the forerunner enters this very week, and it enters differently because you have set it in order inwardly. The Mass of Sunday the 21st, you'll live with a quiet heart. The candle of the household altar you'll light with full awareness. The holy water you'll have, the flask full beside the family altar. And everything else will set itself in order on its own, while the word of the Baptist does its silent work in every corner of your Catholic home. There's a peace that enters the soul when what is true gets clearly separated from what was inherited out of old custom. That peace you've been searching for so many years is already inside you, settled in from this very moment. The forerunner sees the heart that has set things in order, and he looks at it with the tenderness of the older brother the saint of Avila spoke of. And now I'm going to ask you something. Stay. Don't leave just yet, because what you've learned today about the Eve of the Baptist is only a door. Only the first door of an entire house Saint Teresa of Jesus left open for you, and that very few devout Catholics know how to walk through end to end. Behind that first door, there are others. There's a day in the Catholic calendar, very close to today, where something similar to what we've just discovered together is lived, an inherited mixture of Christian devotion and old customs worth unraveling with the same clarity. Do you know which day it is? I can promise you it's closer than you think, and that your own grandmother had specific customs on that day she never explained to you where they truly came from. Another important revelation waits as well. Saint Teresa of Avila wrote in The Interior Castle a secret that changes the way one prays the Rosary forever. A single line in a specific chapter many people read past too quickly, that when a devout woman reads it carefully for the first time, she can no longer pray the Rosary the way she did before. Would you like to know what it says? I can promise you no confessor will ever have explained it to you with the clarity it will have here. And there's still one more door. The Saint of Avila tells, in her own words preserved in her major works, what her soul saw when she stood at the gates of heaven during one of her prolonged ecstasies. What she saw and what she understood in that moment about your own eternal destiny. That was written down, it's documented, and very few Catholics have heard it told with the depth it deserves. If what you've listened to today has reached your heart, I assure you one thing: what comes next will reach you even deeper. Because the teaching of Saint Teresa of Jesus needs to be heard little by little, piece by piece, over many weeks, like an ancient mosaic that gets completed slowly. Each piece you add changes the meaning of all the previous ones. I know devout women, lifelong Catholics, who after listening to one of these stories about the Saint of Avila, have come back to sacramental confession for the first time in many years with real sorrow for their sins. A single word inside the story, dropped almost without notice, has touched something they had been carrying asleep since their youth, and everything in them changed from that specific day on. You can't imagine how many women are listening to this voice right now in a similar situation, hoping a single word will touch that sleeping fiber in their soul too. That word is waiting for you in the next story. I don't know which one will reach you, because every soul is different, but I promise you it's there. Saint Teresa of Jesus is still speaking from heaven to Catholic souls who have ears to hear her, and you have already shown by staying this far that you have those ears, Don't close them now. Stay. One more story. Just one, I ask you with affection. And you'll see the whole day shifts in you, even in something subtle. Because the saint of Avila does not give up on a soul that has come close to her with sincerity. She follows that soul and accompanies it little by little to where the Lord wants it to go. And you are right there along that path, exactly at this precise point of the road. And before I leave too, let me say one thing close to your ear. This voice you've listened to today is the voice of a sister walking with you, just as you are walking with her in this moment. Tomorrow, when you go out into the street to do your daily things, remember the Baptist holds you present from heaven. And that Saint Teresa of Avila, from her place of glory beside the Lord, smiles when she sees one of her spiritual daughters setting her home in order before the feast of the Forerunner draws near. May God bless you, and may the Virgin Mary cover you this entire week with her motherly mantle. May the Saint of Avila from heaven intercede for you before the Lord at every hour of these days. And may you, my dear daughter, live the feast of June 24th with an inner peace you have never felt before in your life. Until the next story, go with God, and may the Forerunner walk with you step by step